Our closing keynote speaker, Kenda Macdonald, has patiently waited 2 years to be here to deliver this talk to you today. We actually worked quite closely on it, didn't we? Like in the early days, we had lots of discussions about what's it going to be about and what sort of things would work here. And as I sort of said before, that's the kind of thing that I think really works here at Marketed Live, thinking about what is it that we need. I love it when that happens. Now, I've seen Kenda speak several times. I've read a book, Hack the Buyer Brain, and we often chat about things, why things are the way that they are, why I'm thinking the things that I'm thinking, which part of my brain makes me feel the way that I do at the moment. And I suppose basically I'm telling you that she's now my psychotherapist. Although now she's going to tell me what the difference is between a psychotherapist and psychologist and why they're not anything similar. She's a forensic psychology major and the founder, nearly said foundation, the founder of Automation Ninjas, a marketing agency specializing in behavioral marketing automation. She does speak around the world. She was at Brighton SEO last week. She says this is better. And if you follow her on Instagram, you'll know that she knows a lot about foraging as well. I learned lots about that. I learned last night that she's been self-sufficient. Was that right? Her and her husband have been self-sufficient in terms of food for a year or something like that. Incredible. So I'm thrilled that we finally get to do this. It's Kenda Macdonald.
All right, guys, I am actually super amped to be here, really excited, because bias is something that I am really passionate about. And Paul, yes, we worked really closely on this talk, so closely that I decided I was going to write a book on it. So I am now really deep into writing my second book, all about cognitive bias, thanks to Paul. So you'll have to do my foreword now. Yes. So guys, we're going to talk about the burden of bias and what it does to us as consumers, but also what that really means for us as businesses. And I want to show you guys a little bit of the neuroscience behind that, because there's nothing like understanding a little bit about how the brain actually works to make you realize why doing some things in marketing works and why some things are important and all the other shit that you can just ignore, right? So that's what we really want to do. So yes, there's another picture of my face. So that's me. I'm Kenda Macdonald. And yes, I am the founder of Automation Ninjas, and we are an agency that specializes in behavioral marketing automation. People are like, what does that mean? Well, all that really means is that I studied forensic psychology, and I got really frustrated about the fact that we don't really understand how the brain works as marketers. And you go to conferences and you see people talk a little bit about psychology, and we always use it for nefarious purposes. And that's foreshadowing for later. So I help people understand how to use that appropriately and how to create marketing that actually caters for what the brain needs at various different stages. I also did write a book about this, about how we evolve to survive and not to buy things online. And that has some implications. But really, I spend most of my day making pretty flowcharts because, you know, what else would you want to do as a marketer? And one of the things that I always find when you're working with a client and you're getting into the nitty-gritty of things is we forget about how corrupt the brain is and how terribly bad it is at making decisions. And we always think people are super, super logical. So really, when you are buying something and you're going through the process of purchasing something, you're making a series of decisions. And decisions are hella complicated, right? Everyone thinks that decisions are just decision making. They aren't. Decisions also involve problem solving, because you have to suss out what your problem is. You have to then decide what the solution is. And sometimes you have to work with someone to figure out what the solution is. You also have to do a little bit of judgment. So you have to take all the information that you sussed out about that and decide whether or not the thing that you're going to do is good or bad. And on top of that, you actually participate in both deductive and inductive reasoning. Psychology buzzword alert, right? So deductive reasoning is when you go through like a scientific process of, okay, this thing happens, then this thing happens, therefore this is the logical conclusion. Inductive reasoning is what the brain prefers to do, and that's when we go and make a sweeping generalization about something, and we just group something together, make a quick decision, and off we go. So all of this is involved in making a purchase decision. And then there's the actual purchase itself, which has a whole nother section of neuroscience that gets involved. So there's a lot going on, and we really expect that the whole way through this, our brains are gonna be really fucking great, and they're not. They suck so bad. They are not our friends at the best of times. And I mean that in two different ways. They're not our friends as consumers ourselves, and they're certainly not our friends as marketers for our consumers' brains. They're going through a lot of stuff. They're dealing with a lot of things all the time. And really, brains are bad in a couple of different reasons. Number one, we just lazily save calories. That's what our brains are trying to do. They're just trying to be efficient. So I want to give you guys context. When I talk about this, and I'm like, yeah, the brain is really shit the whole time. I don't mean that, we have a sucky organ in our heads. What I mean is that our brains are trying to do the best that they can. They're trying to be efficient. And as they're trying to be efficient, they make bad choices. And we just have to be really conscious of that. Because we do things like hill climb. Hill climbing is one of my favorite things that the brain does. You have a goal. You have a thing that you want to do. And rather than achieving that goal, the brain goes, I'm going to give you an easier goal that is not the thing that you want to do, and I'm going to do that because that's the better choice. I think you guys will all have done this. You're like, yeah, I'm going to clean the house. And then you do the dishes and you feel great. The rest of the house ain't done, but the dishes are done, so you go watch Netflix, right? We all do this. The brain likes to substitute things, and we do this sort of subconsciously all the time as consumers, which means we're not always logically making the best choices. But on top of that, the brain likes to transfer and conflate things. So it likes to take emotions and experiences from other things, maybe unrelated things, and likes to transfer it to now. Because it's efficient. We don't have to create a whole new process and a whole new habit and a whole new way of doing things. We'll just steal experience from this memory and put it on here right now. But, unfortunately, that causes errors. When we conflate things, we take things that don't belong together and we smoosh them together and we go, okay, we tidy that, put that under the rug. So the brain is doing this because it's trying to be efficient. Then we'll also condense information and we'll satisfy. So we like to compact information down to save storage capacity. And so we like to make it really small. But that means we lose a lot of context and a lot of really, really important information. And with satisficing, we'll break things down and we'll try and find the easiest path to get to it. Not the best path, the easiest path to get to it. So when you take a look at that, how can we really be making good decisions? And then, of course, we generalize. Hello, stereotypes and racism, woo! Sexism thrown in there for good measure. The brain is really responsible for a lot of generalizations because it's easy. It's really easy to make a generalization and to give context and to understand the world. But we have to work hard against that. And on top of that, of course, then you have doubling down on information. We don't like taking new information in. We don't want to learn new stuff. We're just going to add things to the things we already know and make us feel comfortable and happy, right? We don't want to go and create new habits and learn new things. So yeah, the brain is giving us a really hard time in all of these different situations. And really, it's because of bias. Bias happens. It's kind of like shit happens, but bias happens. All day, every day, bias is happening. And really, when I say bias, we have three different things that the brain is trying to do to take in information. We have algorithms. Algorithms run in the background all the time. Things like breathing, your heart beating, walking up the stage, although I don't think Paul managed that successfully just now. These are algorithms. They very rarely go wrong. Most of the time, you're not even aware of them. Then we have heuristics. They break up the world and help us, make decisions quickly. They're like rule sets that we utilize. But sometimes heuristics go wrong. And when heuristics go wrong, we have cognitive biases, little corruptions and errors that happen in the brain. And these biases are happening all day, every day. And there's a very specific reason that happens. So some of you may have seen this, and you just have to shush a little bit. But we have two different systems that we utilize to understand the world around us. This is dual process theory, originally created by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. They said we have these two different systems that we understand the world around us with, and because we're super inventive, we're going to call them System 1 and System 2, because we're inventive chaps like that, right? And they said, System 1, it's very fast. And System 2, well, it's very slow. Hence their book, Thinking Fast and Slow. See, inventiveness is a streak amongst these guys. Now, I'm being mean. These guys actually won the Nobel Prize in economics for this theory. So, they did change massively how we think about the world. And they said, okay, well, System 1, so fast, it's basically automatic. And System 2, it runs along in the background. System 2 is super, super manual. And System 1, they like to refer to as the autopilot, and System 2 is the pilot. Now, when you look at that, autopilot versus pilot, which one's more important, right? Pilot, yeah, no. Pilot is not more important. Autopilot, definitely more important, in this instance for our brains. And the real difference between these is the fact that System 1 takes in 11 million bits of information per second. Now, that is a shit ton of information. I mean, it's a lot. And System 2 only takes in 40 bits of information per second. You rely on System 2 to get out of the house in the morning, it ain't happening. It's just not happening at all. Now, the reason System 1 is so efficient and can take in this large volume of information is because of the fact that it uses these rules and mental shortcuts to understand the world around us. Those are your algorithms. Those are your heuristics. Whereas System 2, it's a little bit more intensive, it's effortful, and the big doom, it uses calories. Now, I say big doom because the body doesn't want you to use calories in any capacity. God knows I would really love my brain to use more calories than it does on a daily basis, but we can't force it to do so. As a survival mechanism, our bodies are created to hold on to calories. So the brain doesn't want to use that at any time. If we can avoid using System 2, it will do so. And that's why it creates rules and mental shortcuts, to be efficient. You know, it's trying to help us out. Now, whenever I say, like, this is a theory, it's dual process theory, people go, oh, okay, that's just psychologists sitting around in a room and talking to one another. And yes, it was like that until very recently when we started getting some new research through and fMRI scanners became more available and accessible for universities. So this is a fantastic study done by Goel and Dolan. And what they did was they watched deductive reasoning processes. So they got people to go through a series of reasoning and logics tasks. And one of the tasks they gave them was syllogisms. Now, syllogisms are, aside from sounding really rude if you've got as crude a brain as I do, syllogisms are basically when you have like a three-step process. He got it. He laughed. You have a three-step process that you're going places. So an example is dogs are mammals, cats are mammals, therefore dogs are cats. Okay, that is incorrect, massively incorrect. That's how the brain likes to work things out. So let's do another example. You've got a bird that you've found, and you put it in a cage, and you call your friend, and you're like, I've got a bird, it's in a cage, I don't know what it is. And they ask you to explain the bird, and you say, well, the bird is black. Okay, so, and it's making lots of really loud noises, and it's quite big. So that person goes, crows are black, the bird is black, the bird is a crow. Okay, nice logical process that we go through, nice bit of deductive reasoning. But it's not that simple, because sometimes belief gets involved in the process, and we bias ourselves with the recall of information. So here's an example that probably everybody in the room knows. I have a beautiful friend. There are always men going after her. She can have any man she wants. That is a logical fallacy. We don't have context, we don't have data to make that assumption. But the brain jumps there really quickly. And the brain is doing this because it is recalling information from our belief centers. So what they basically did was they went, okay, we're going to give people a couple of different tasks. One where they're like laden with belief, and belief is definitely going to get involved. And we're going to give them another opportunity where we help them a little bit and make sure that belief doesn't screw everything up. So on this side, because our left and right are now different, on this side, we have the correct areas. So when people made correct assumptions, they worked it out and they didn't get it wrong. We can see we have one area of the brain activating, a different area activating when people realized they were making a mistake and corrected it. On the other side, we have the side where bias got involved and people made incorrect assumptions. Now, the important thing between those is not the areas of the brain and all that faff. It's the fact you have different parts of the brain activating. When we make these errors and we make these biases, that over there is System 1 getting involved and shortcutting the process and making it easy and being efficient and causing a bias. This area here is our more cognitive person, the person we like to think of as us, the cognitive miser. So it gets complicated, talking about System 1 and System 2 all the time. So I like to talk about them in terms of the minions as being System 1 and Gru as being System 2. So if you haven't seen the movie, shame on you, and you should leave right now and go and watch it. That's your homework. You don't even have to go to the after party. Just go straight to jail. But the way that this movie works is we have Gru, this criminal overlord, right? He's this mastermind. He's a genius. He's very good, right? He knows what he's doing. And what Gru does is he has all these dastardly plans. But there's only one Gru. There's only so much one genius can do. So he either employs or enslaves a little race of yellow people. I'm not entirely sure what they're trying to teach our children. But he has this little race of yellow people that go about, and they do all the things for him. And effectively, the minions aren't very bright. It's kind of like a one minion, one job sort of a deal. And they get things wrong if you like make it overcomplicated or sort of override them. But it's okay because there's thousands of them. So they get all of his stuff done. And the whole plot of the movie is these guys just fucking shit up, right? That is the whole plot of the movie, is them getting stuff wrong and just making a mess. That's your brain, yay! Now we can celebrate, but really it is your brain, because this is exactly what we are doing all day, every day. This guy we like to think is in control. It's very clear throughout the movie he is not in control. They're in control, and they're running the show. We only spend 15% of our day in sort of Gru mode. We spend the other 85% of our day in minion mode. And when we create our marketing materials, who do we think's in control? We think he's in control. And we create marketing materials full of really logical stuff. And what happens? These guys see it and they just fuck it all up, right? They ignore it. These guys are the gatekeepers to attention. You have to make sure that you get through to them in order to get anywhere with him. And that's exactly how our brain works. And this has serious implications for the way that we lay things out. So minions rule, but minions going to make mistakes all day, every day. So your consumers are in minion mode. And when you're talking to them, you need to be conscious of that. And you need to make sure that you're helping the minions first if you want to get ahead. So when it comes to biases and the mistakes that the minions are making, all the bias belong to us. Any gamers in the room will understand. But effectively, there was a fantastic piece of work done by Buster Benson where he categorized all the biases. Now, there are over 300 discovered biases. However, there are 188, I think, at last count, that have some serious scientific validity behind them, that have had peer-reviewed experiments done. And Buster Benson took all of these and categorized them into 4 different areas. He said that he was on paternity leave when he was doing it and had a newborn. And I mean, the work is such good quality. I'm amazed at what he did. So basically, there are 4 different areas, and I've spent a large amount of my book research having a look and just making sure that it's valid, and it is. We have these 4 different areas that we are going to encounter bias in. So if your consumer has too much information, we're going to have lots of different biases. Because there's no point looking at lots of individual biases and trying to make sure you're countering all of your materials for 188 different biases. Focus on the categories instead. So if we have too much information, bias is going to get involved. If we have not enough meaning or not enough context around something, you're going to fall foul of biases. If we need to make a decision really quickly, bias is going to give you a really hard time. And if we need to remember or recall information, we have the opportunity to fall foul of bias. So these 4 areas are really important for us as marketers, because that will happen at every decision-making process, and we need to counter for them. So bias will happen. They are going to ruin your conversions. So let's just be really conscious of that, and let's figure out a way that we can help mitigate it. So I said that I was going to show you guys 5 different crutches. But what I want you guys to do is I actually want you to count the crutches as we're going through. So I'm going to show you 5 individual biases. And it'll make sense in a second. So this is my favorite, confirmation bias. Probably my favorite cartoon ever created. So we will all do this. We will go off to the internet and research something for an argument and just take the first piece of information we come across, right? And be like, yes, I am valid and clever. So the brain is really drawn to information that it already has in place, right? We are drawn to ideas and things that we already know and we already support. We do not like things that conflict because that's easy. We can add things to something rather than creating something new entirely. And we will very often just totally ignore contrary information. Anybody seeing a little bit of COVID misinformation happening here? Yay for confirmation bias. But we'll also do things like we'll take ambiguous information, so information that's a little bit vague, that could go either way, And we'll just bias that information and say, yes, this is my information that matches my viewpoint. It doesn't, but we'll do that anyway because we are drawn to that information. And this was originally discovered by Peter Wasson. I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly at all, but I've decided he's French. I have no idea whether or not he's French. And what he was doing was he was sort of having a look at how we hypothesis test naturally. So do we hypothesis test naturally? And he was having a look at this process, and he kind of created this experiment. It's called the card experiment. I hate it. I've done it so many times. I am so biased against it. It's ridiculous. And even though I know I'm biased, I still can't make it work, and it's really frustrating. And basically, what he was showing was the way that you overcome this logical test is you have to hypothesis disprove. So when you're doing the scientific method stuffs, what you have to do is you have to disprove your hypothesis. You can't prove your hypothesis. You have to disprove it. That's how the scientific method works. Human brains do not work like that. We want to prove it, and we will always try and prove information first. And he was the one who originally discovered this. So as marketers, we have a significant challenge here. Because if we are doing the thing that marketers always do, which is create products for things that people need, not the things that they want, what do? We bias ourselves against confirmation, right? Because now we're creating information and creating marketing materials about the things that people need, and they don't want to hear that. So the minions filter that information out, and it doesn't get paid attention to. So it's fantastic marketing advice when people say, create the products for the things that people want, because that's what the brain wants. But because we're experts, we know that the things that people want aren't always the things that are good for people. So how do we de-bias people against this? How do we get around this? The best way to mitigate confirmation bias is with critical thinking. And to get consumers to go through critical thinking and to use calories in the process is really hard. And one of the easiest ways that you can do this is by creating things like buyer's guides. Creating things where people are looking for more in-depth information. They want to be educated. They want to go through a process. They want to learn. And you can walk them step by step through the process. Show them comparisons. Show them the information and contrast information and be really clear about things. Provide data, provide backing up for everything that you're saying, but provide human stories, provide human context. We were not created to understand data, but we passed stories on human to human for hundreds of years. So stories are important if they're told appropriately and with meaning and with context. So confirmation bias is not going to be your friend at any point in the process unless you're a misinformation marketer, in which case leave right now and be gone. Never foul this place ever again. But effectively, confirmation bias, create good guides, get critical thinking involved and walk people and structure them through the process. But this is going to mean you don't even get attention in the first place. Never mind ruining your conversions. You ain't going to have the conversion because you can't even get eyeballs on your stuff, right? So be careful about how you talk about things. Then we have ambiguity bias. And while the brain is amazing when it comes to ambiguity, it hates it. We like things that are really secure. So ambiguity bias is when you have a couple of different options, as an example. One option is definitely the better option, but it's a bit vague as to what the outcome is and what the context is around it and what it actually means to the consumer. And the other option is really clear. It's a shitter option, but it's really, really clear and we understand the context and we know what's going on. Which one does the consumer choose? It chooses the safe one. This is a bias that is safety-based. We're not going to walk into a scary forest where we know that maybe we could get through the scary forest without being eaten by the bear. Maybe, but we're not sure where the path is. And we don't know if there are wolves and lions and all sorts of other scary stuff and maybe killer spiders. We're not going to go in there. We will go on the path that's longer and a bit more horrible, but it's in the sunlight and we know exactly where that's going. So from an evolutionary perspective, this makes total sense. But what do? We don't talk about the features. We don't show people how our products and services will actually help them reach our goals. We don't provide context. We don't walk people through the onboarding. We don't tell them what the process of sales is going to be like. And by God, do we hide pricing and comparison information. We don't want people to compare stuff. We don't want people to have context around things because we don't want people to know how we stack up to the competition. If you feel like that, it's a great opportunity to work on your products and services so you can feel better about it. So if you have ambiguity in place, get rid of it, eliminate it, put systems in place to make sure that there isn't ambiguity for your consumers and that you really provide clarity and context. And then, yes, there are memes. But anecdotal fallacy is fantastic, so I'm going to read this. I don't always use anecdotal fallacies, but when I do, it's using an isolated experience instead of a sound argument, because none of us have ever done that before, right? Definitely not me when I was arguing with my husband 30 minutes before I left the house. You always do this. That is not true. So effectively, anecdotal fallacy is the fact that if you provide people with things like data and stuff, people will always go for the more human context. My sister's brother, their son or their teenage daughter lost their arm when they had the COVID vaccine, compared to all the information and data that says that it's perfectly safe. Why is that? Is it because we have an extreme distrust of the government and everything else? Probably. But it's also because there was a person behind that. There's a human story attached to that. And we can understand that. The brain gets context around that. So we fall foul of anecdotal fallacy on sales pages because we don't give people that context. So there's something really great that I wish everybody did more frequently, and that is a micro case study. And a micro case study is literally a sentence. It is a bookmark. It is something that is just a little snippet that gives people validity. So for instance, I like to use this in my blog posts where I'll say something like, this method increased the conversion rates of one of our clients by 351%. I'll link it to something else. But it's anecdotal, right? It's a snippet. Whenever I put a testimonial on, I put a picture of someone's face, right? To make sure that they can see the human behind it. Whenever you do a case study, you make them the hero of the case study, not you and how great you are. You make your consumer that went through that case study the hero. Because it's stories that we can relate to and we can understand and we have context around, and the brain is catered and geared for that, because that's how we've evolved. So don't fall foul of this. If you are presenting data and you're presenting statistics, give people the opportunity to understand how it applies to a human. Don't just put a bunch of stats together. Okay, and then loss aversion. We've definitely all done this. Bought the more expensive option because it's got free shipping. Or spent an extra 50 quid because then I don't have to spend £2 on shipping, right? Definitely something we all do, but we can blame the brain on it, right? We can definitely blame the brain on all of this stuff. So loss aversion is a funny one because people will go for options where they are not going to lose out on something and they're going to gain stuff. But the problem with loss aversion is we feel the loss of an option way more heavily than we feel gaining the same option. So they did some really great tests where they gave people monetary amounts, and if they made wrong choices, they took the money away from them. Oh my God, people's brains went nuts. They don't like having things taken away from them. It makes sense evolutionarily, right? You take stuff away that decreases your chances of survival. You gain things that increases your chances of survival. But we don't feel the gain as keenly as we feel the loss. And one of the challenges that we have for this is this gets used in manipulation a lot, but we don't make comparisons clear for our consumers. We like to pretend that our competition doesn't exist, but our consumers aren't pretending that. They're also doing the research. They know everyone who's out there. So when they're going and they're looking at other people's products and services, what are they listing out? And if they come and look at your page and look at your information, do they feel like they're losing out on your offer because they're not getting some silly things that were listed? It doesn't matter what's being lost out, it just matters that we're losing something. So be really, really clear with your consumers as to what the risks are with your products, and this is particularly important when you're in finance. You have to be really clear about what the risks are and what the losses involved could be. But that's why they have that little thing, by the way, I'm looking at you. That's why they have the little thing at the bottom of a whole bunch of various different finance-related things. They have like, you could lose all of your life savings, and blah, 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 blah. Because they did a whole bunch of studies where they found that people don't think about that until after the fact, and then it's a whole bad thing. But psychology was involved with making that happen, which is kind of cool. So when you're listing things out, just make sure you're being really clear with people what they're losing out on if they don't choose a certain option and what they're gaining if they're going to choose a certain option. And I don't mean pressing the button really hard and making people feel shit because they're not choosing an option. I mean making it clear what the different options are available and what is best for them at the point of time that they are currently in. So loss aversion is something that we definitely fall foul of all the time, and it's bad for our conversion rates. And then we have the availability heuristic. Okay, this is me. I love horror movies, pretty much exclusively. So the meme says, hear a noise in the dark after watching a horror movie, serial killer. That's me every time. Like the 2 days after I've watched a horror movie, I'm like, oh my God, Annabelle's coming to get me. Like every time I hear a small noise in the house somewhere. Annabelle's like a scary doll. Dolls are really creepy. But Annabelle's a scary doll from a horror movie. And if you never want to sleep ever again or be able to look at a doll, you should watch that horror movie. But the availability heuristic is fascinating because what the brain does is it takes the most recently encoded information. And I heard those guys at the back mention the mere exposure effect. So the mere exposure effect is because of the availability heuristic. So it takes the most recently encoded information and it makes that the most important information. It's not the most important. It's just recently encoded, right? It also takes the information that it can recall the fastest and says, oh, well, this information's better than all of that other information. It's not. It can just be recalled really easily. So we fall foul of this because do our consumers remember who we are? Do they remember our products and services? Are our things memorable enough that people can be like, yeah, I know who that is? All the talk we've had today about weirdness and being different and creating something that stands out, here it is, right? The availability heuristic is the thing that is responsible for all of that working. So you can fall foul of this if somebody else can recall your competitors more than they can recall you. So what are you doing to be more memorable? This is why content marketing works so fantastically well, because it makes you more memorable. It means that you're there, you're helping, you're encoding, you're creating information, you're building a relationship, and it works fantastically. Okay, so who's been counting, and who realizes that this is number 6 and not number 5? Did anybody notice that? No? No, you guys, you're obviously too into the content. I'm going to take that as you're not sleeping. So I added this in because it's not about our consumers. This one's about us. This is our bias. This is our mistake as marketers. We have the curse of knowledge, especially if you're an expert in an industry. We forget how great we are, because we're fucking great, right? No, but we forget how great we are. And we talk at this level over here, and our consumer is at this level down here. And we use jargon and terminology and lots of gumph words and lots of fluff, rather than talking at their level and getting them up to that level. Right? So don't use that. Put yourself in their shoes. And it's something that you have to keep doing time and time again. What do they care about? What are the goals? What are the things that they need to hear? Come down to their level. But we also forget that we are amazing. And we forget how great our products and services are because we disconnect ourselves from the pain that that consumer is feeling in that moment because we're not bringing ourselves into it all the time. So we have to spend a little bit of time really working hard and getting ourselves back into that position so that we're not creating content that doesn't match with what someone understands. And if someone doesn't understand, doesn't have context, not going to pay attention to it, it's gone. So make it minion friendly if you're going to be creating good content. So here's the thing I'm really, really passionate about. And this is Paul's laughing because we definitely did not have a very big debate about this at the speaker dinner. But marketing really sucks. And I say that as I suck, you guys suck, and collectively, we're a giant bag of dicks to our consumers. Like, we are not great. We are not great to our consumers. So if you give us a channel, like Facebook or Twitter, we will ruin it completely. And we'll give it back to you and be like, it's broken. It's broken. This is terrible. How could you? We did that. We ruined it with our ads and our shittiness and our fakeness. And if you give us a cognitive bias, we will exploit it. 100%. I don't know how many conferences I go to and I see psychologists, not psychologists, but people talking about psychology at conferences, and they are talking about how you can use a bias on a sales page to get an X% increase in conversion. Use the anchoring effect to make sure that this stays in memory and da-da-da-da. But you'll notice all the way that I talked about stuff now is about debiasing. That's the official term for it. Mitigating a bias, stopping it from happening. Biases are corruptions. They are mistakes that the brain is making. It is morally and ethically repugnant to be exploiting an error that someone's brain is making. If you put that in front of an ethics committee and decided you wanted to do an experiment with it, with a psychology committee, they'd say, no, you can't do that, because ethically it's not okay. Yet as marketers, we lean into that. And we lean into these biases and we coerce and we exploit our audiences. And I don't think that we go out to do it on purpose. I think some people definitely do. But I don't think that we try and do these things because deep down we're really horrible people. There are some people that I'd quite happily set on fire. However, most of us are quite nice. I just think that we don't think about it. So I want to go deeper. So we suck for a couple of different reasons. First, we like to use lots of hacks and tricks and coercion to try and get a better conversion rate. We also like to ignore strategy in favor of quick wins, right? We like to do things that give us a little dopamine hit. And at the end of the day, that's because we're biased against our own biases, right? There are a ton of different biases that come into play with this, but we have a responsibility as marketers. There's that word. We have a real responsibility as marketers to be helping our consumers make more conscious and considered choices. We have a responsibility because we know these things are happening and we know what's out there and we know what's good for them. We have a responsibility to take them through it, not to manipulate them. And we have work to do. We know that if we make these things happen, if we mitigate biases and build relationships with consumers, we will get higher customer lifetime value. We might not get the quick win, but we'll get the long-term wins. So Nathan said it earlier, build for the long term. That's what we need to do. We need to take people on a slightly longer journey, focus higher up on the funnel, take them on a longer journey, build a relationship with them, build a lifelong relationship with them. Customer lifetime value is where your profits are. So we need to stop this nonsense. But just for fun, I want to tell you about your biases because it's great. So conferences are really good for this. Sorry, Paul, this is the best conference ever. But conferences are great for this. The bandwagon effect, where you see a really great talk about TikTok and you're like, oh my God, yes, I need to be on TikTok. Is your audience on TikTok? Not a fuck. But we're going to go and do a TikTok thing anyway because everyone's doing it and the bandwagon is so exciting. But then we also have in-group bias. Everyone else is doing it, so it's fine. This is marketing's current massive problem. Everyone else is doing it, so it's totally okay. It's not. It's bad. We're bad. We should feel bad. But we do it anyway. So we have a little bit of work to do to come out of this. We also have information bias, which is where we just go collect more information. We're just going to collect more. We know what we need to do, but we're going to carry on collecting information. I'm looking at Janine for some reason. And this is because we're ruled by our own minions, right? Our minions are getting in on the process. So what we need to be doing is we need to be focusing on debiasing, getting rid of biases for our consumers, making sure that we're not leaning into coercion, but actually leaning into their consciousness because they do want to be more conscious. Consumers want to make good choices. That's why they're consuming content. If you removed those biases for them, they would make better decisions. And that's an indication that leaning into those biases and manipulating them is wrong. So we need to work harder. So let's talk about how we can do that. So if there is too much information, the brain's going to do a couple of different things. First and foremost, it's going to filter lots of stuff out that it probably shouldn't filter out. It's definitely going to do that. It's also just going to go through continually and it's going to pick out meaningful bits. It's probably not meaningful what it's picking out, right? You have to tell them what meaningful is, provide that context. I would love to have a little context counter on the front of the stage because the amount of times I'm going to say the word context is quite sickening. So there's a bit of foreshadowing as to what one of the points that you should do is at the end. We're also drawn to things that are really funny and stick out, so this is great for the weirdness stuff that we were talking about earlier. So we like things that stick out of the norm. But that doesn't mean that's the important thing. It's just the fact that we are drawn to that. And then on top of it, we always notice things that are primed in memory or repeated often. So there's your availability heuristic. And we confirm our own beliefs. So we know these things are going to happen. In any time when there is too much information, these things are guaranteed going to happen. These are the biases that are going to happen. So what do? Well, 2 little tips. Simplify everything as much as you can. Keep it easy for the minions, right? Keep it really simple. And then repeat information. You know that fantastic copywriting rule of 3s? Tell people you're going to tell them something, tell them the thing, and then tell them you've just told them the thing. There's a reason that works. Funnily enough, availability heuristic, yay! So if you can repeat important information and simplify it down so that it's easy for people to understand, you can help them cut through the noise. You do that, you actually get positive biases that kick in for being good. You get brownie points, right? And the brownie points are you get higher reward activation in the brain. It is good to be good. I'm not just standing here telling you we're all shit and we're just shit. It is actually good to be good. We will get rewards from it, and the rewards are ROI and customer lifetime value. So what next, though? When we talk about not enough meaning, and if there's not enough meaning and there's not enough context, people are going to connect dots that don't need to be connected, because we need stories. So we'll make stories from sparse data. Humans need context, and we will make up things when there isn't anything to be made up. So you can let them do it, or you can help them. Okay? So on top of that, we will really just generalize and fill in characteristics, and we'll also lean on stereotypes if we don't have enough information. And we'll oversimplify numbers and data. We're really bad at doing that because we don't like numbers and data. Even those of us who like numbers and data will oversimplify the numbers and data. We'll also project emotions, memories, context, transference. We'll project a lot of things onto stuff that isn't there because we don't have the meaning. So what do we need to do? Well, provide meaning. If there's not enough meaning, just provide it. And I know it sounds really silly, but if you take a look at a lot of information that we create and the content we create, we don't provide meaning. We don't tell people what the meaning is behind something. We don't help people understand how that actually applies to them. We just tell them the thing, and we expect them to fill the rest in. Don't expect that. And then just be really explicit with everything. And I saw something, I say something, I'm looking at Janine Coombs. Janine created a really great lead magnet. And at the end of each important section, she had a little summary box. And the little summary box highlighted all the important information. Fantastic. Do that. It's really great because you're explicit, you're providing meaning, and you're providing context. All right, and then what about when we need to act fast? What about when our consumers need to make a really good decision? But they need to do it quickly and they need to do it now. Well, the brain's just going to be horrible to them because they'll get super overconfident in their abilities. So they'll be like, yeah, I can implement all of that in like a week. It's fine. It's not fine. You can't implement all of that in a week. So our brains will be overconfident. So help people understand things and what the context is and what the risks are associated with things. We'll also favor immediate and relatable information. So if it's something that they can have quickly over something that's longer term, they're always going to go for the thing that's quick, right? So if you have long-term results, try and give people a quick win right in the beginning and give them context and help them understand that. But we prefer completion. This is the sunk cost fallacy. If we've put effort into something, we feel like we just need to finish that thing. Even if we should let go of that thing and stop paying attention to that thing, we'll still try and complete it. So if someone needs to do something really quickly, they will actually try and complete something even though they should let it go. And we prefer autonomy and the status quo. Now this is fantastic because this is such a clash, and these two things should not go together. If somebody needs to make a very quick decision, they will want to make a decision in which they can be in control of something, but also where they're not going to disrupt the status quo too much. They're not going to, make too many wrinkles in the water. So effectively, they need to know that they're in control of something, and also they're not going against the crowd, they're going with the crowd. So help people understand where they fit in that. And avoid ambiguity at all costs, because the brain won't like that either. Okay, so going backwards. So what do we need to do? Number one, summarize information, make it easy for people to understand, and highlight important and contextual information if they need to make a quick decision. You'll notice credit card companies have started doing this recently, or loan agreements, but they'll give you the information you need to know, fact sheet. Instead of you reading the terms and conditions, you just read one short little thing. It's a way to get people to consume information that is important without them having to do all of the rest when people are making a stressed decision. All right. Okay, so finally, when we need to remember something, the brain's going to do some stuff, and it's going to keep only what's useful, and it will eliminate the rest. So you can let the brain decide what's useful, or you can tell it. So help people understand what is actually useful. They will also pick out a few things, and they'll discard everything else, so you can be in control of that, or you can let them do it themselves. And it will save space, so it'll delete old things to try and put new things in place. And of course, it will transfer and conflate. And transference is something that we don't have much control over, but conflation we do. So transference is where somebody transfers emotions and context and memories from something else, and even experience from something else onto a new situation. You don't have too much control over that, unfortunately. But conflation we do have control over, where it takes things and it smooshes them together and goes, these two things are the same, when they're not the same. If you provide context, you can mitigate for that. On top of that, we just make sure that we are keeping things really simple and we give people the big picture, they understand meaning and they understand context. So in all of this, if we can make it minion friendly, make it really easy for them to understand, if we provide context, because context is king, not content anymore, and we can create a frame and help them control it, we will help people make better decisions. So I wanted to show you how we can make minions happy really quickly. So minions love specificity. That's what makes them happy. Something that's really specific, it's contextual, they can understand. So Eugene Schwartz did a fantastic piece of work where he created the awareness journey. Now this maps the general buying process that the brain goes through, but awareness is a journey that we all go through as consumers. And he said we start off unaware, we don't know we have a problem. Then there's a catalyst. Something happens, we realize we have an issue, we become problem aware. Then we become aware that there are solutions. As we learn more about our problem, we realize that there are solutions that we can, undertake to help us. We then become product aware, and finally, we become most aware, and then we buy a product. Now, the important thing about this process is that at each and every stage, we consume different information. And therefore, the context is different at each stage. So if you want to help minions, you want to help provide specificity, you want to help people make better decisions, be clear on how each of those stages, how that impacts their consumption journey and what content you need to provide and what context you need to provide. All right, guys, so rounding up. First and foremost, be aware of bias. I think we're very aware right now. On top of that, just provide context everywhere you can. It's the number one thing that you can do to de-bias, is provide context. And then lean into that consciousness, not coercion. If you catch yourself and you think, if I took this bias away, would someone make a better decision? Then you're probably doing a bad thing and you shouldn't do it. And KIMF, so keep it minion-friendly at every single step along the journey, all right? That's your new hashtag for everything now. All right, guys, so that's been me. And there was tons of content types that I wanted to go through that obviously we can't because we don't have time for that. But if you guys want to get that, it'll be out in a couple of weeks because it's some work that I'm doing on the book at the moment. So, sorry for your brains. We can go to the bar now very soon.